My journey to the Dominican Republic was supposed to be an adventure filled with sun, sand, and unforgettable memories. My friends and I had decided to break away from the well-trodden path of all-inclusive resorts and opt for a more authentic experience, choosing to stay in a charming Airbnb in a local neighborhood instead. The pictures of our chosen villa had been enticing, surrounded by lush tropical gardens, a private pool, and a short drive away from the pristine beaches of Punta Cana. It seemed like the perfect paradise for our group of four. Little did we know that our decision would plunge us into a harrowing ordeal, where danger lurked in the shadows of paradise. Our flight had been long but uneventful, and as we stepped off the plane into the sweltering Dominican heat, our excitement was palpable. Our villa was located in a quiet, picturesque neighborhood that seemed worlds away from the bustling tourist areas. Upon arrival, we were greeted by Maria, the owner of the Airbnb, a warm and welcoming Dominican woman who had lived in the area for years. She showed us around the beautiful property, explaining the ins and outs of the villa, and even recommended local restaurants and attractions. She assured us that the neighborhood was safe, filled with friendly people who would be happy to share their culture with us. The first few days were idyllic. We explored the local markets, sampled delicious Dominican cuisine, and soaked up the sun on the stunning beaches. We felt like we had stumbled upon a hidden gem, far removed from the tourist crowds. However, as the days passed, we began to notice a shift in our interactions with the locals. At first, it was subtle, a lingering gaze, a friendly smile that didn't quite reach the eyes. It was as if some of the residents had a secret they were unwilling to share. One evening, as we dined at a small family-owned restaurant, our waiter, Miguel, struck up a conversation with us. He was friendly and charming, eager to hear about our travels and share stories of his own. But there was an undercurrent of unease that we couldn't ignore. As the night wore on, Miguel became increasingly insistent, urging us to visit a local nightclub with him. He assured us that it would be an unforgettable experience, one that we couldn't miss, but something about his insistence set off alarm bells in our heads. We politely declined his offer, and he left our table with a strained smile. It was clear that he had other intentions, ones that didn't align with our safety or comfort. Over the next few days, we noticed a pattern emerging. Locals would approach us, striking up conversations and making offers that seemed too good to be true. Exclusive tours, secret beach parties, and invitations to private gatherings. It was as if they were trying to lure us into their world, a world that we knew nothing about. One evening, as we walked through the neighborhood, we were approached by a group of men who seemed friendly enough at first. They introduced themselves as Juan, Carlos, and Rafael, and they claimed to be lifelong residents of the area. They spoke fluent English and were eager to show us around. As we chatted, their true intentions became increasingly clear. They began to make inappropriate comments, touching our arms and shoulders without consent. We felt trapped, surrounded by strangers who seemed intent on taking advantage of our vulnerability. Desperate to escape the situation, we made up an excuse and quickly walked away, our hearts pounding with fear. It was clear that we were being targeted, but we couldn't understand why. Back at the villa, we shared our experiences with Maria, who seemed genuinely concerned for our safety. She explained that while most of the locals were warm and welcoming, there were some who preyed on tourists, seeking to exploit them for financial gain. As we spoke with Maria, she revealed a disturbing truth: the Dominican Republic had become a hotspot for human trafficking. Tourists were often targeted, lured into dangerous situations where they could be kidnapped and sold into slavery. It was a sobering revelation, one that sent shivers down our spines. Determined to stay safe, we decided to keep a low profile and avoid unnecessary interactions with strangers. We spent our days lounging by the pool and our evenings cooking meals at the villa. Our villa had a high gated fence, and we made sure to lock all doors and windows at night, taking turns keeping watch. One evening, as I sat on the porch, gazing out at the starry sky, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. It was as if an invisible presence lurked in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. I glanced around nervously, my heart racing. There was nothing out of the ordinary, just the peaceful sounds of the night, a chorus of crickets, the gentle rustling of palm trees. But the feeling of unease persisted. As I continued to scan the surroundings, my eyes landed on a figure standing in the shadows at the edge of the property. It was a man, tall and imposing, his face obscured by darkness. He didn't move or make a sound, but his presence sent a chill down my spine. I called out to my friends, urging them to come outside. Together, we watched as the man slowly retreated into the darkness, disappearing into the night. It was a terrifying encounter, one that confirmed our worst fears. We knew that we were no longer safe in our Airbnb. We had become targets, marked by those who sought to exploit us for their own gain. It was a horrifying realization, and we knew that we had to act quickly to ensure our safety. The following morning, we contacted Maria and explained the situation. She was deeply concerned and offered to help us find a safe haven away from the neighborhood. She connected us with a local organization that specialized in assisting tourists who had fallen victim to human trafficking attempts. With their assistance, we were relocated to a secure resort, far removed from the dangers of the neighborhood. The days that followed were a blur of relief and gratitude. We had narrowly escaped a fate that could have been far worse, thanks to the vigilance of Maria and the support of the local organization. As we settled into our new surroundings, we couldn't help but reflect on our harrowing experience. The Dominican Republic, a place we had hoped would be a paradise, had become a battleground where our safety had been threatened. It was a stark reminder that danger could lurk in the most unexpected places. Our trip had been irrevocably altered by the ordeal, but it had also given us a newfound appreciation for the importance of awareness and vigilance. We had learned that even in paradise, there were shadows that could darken the brightest of days. As we returned home, we carried the memory of our Dominican adventure with us, a reminder of the fragility of safety and the resilience of the human spirit. We knew that we had been fortunate to escape with our lives, but we also knew that there were others who might not be as lucky. Our hope was that by sharing our story, we could raise awareness about the dangers that tourists could face in foreign lands. We hoped that our experience would serve as a cautionary tale, a reminder to always stay vigilant and trust our instincts, even in the most beautiful of places. The world of online dating can be a mixed bag, a realm of hope, excitement, and the occasional encounter with someone you'd rather forget. My venture into the world of online romance began like many others, with the simple swipe right on Tinder that would lead to the most harrowing experience of my life. Her name was Emily, or so she claimed. Her profile picture showcased a radiant smile and sparkling blue eyes that seemed to invite adventure. We chatted for a few days, and the conversations flowed effortlessly, as if we were old friends reconnecting. There was an air of mystery about her that intrigued me, and before long we decided to meet in person. Our first date was scheduled for a Friday night at a trendy downtown restaurant. I arrived early, a sense of nervous anticipation in the pit of my stomach. The date was a momentous occasion for me, the culmination of my foray into the realm of online dating. Emily was even more captivating in person, with her chestnut hair cascading down her shoulders, her emerald green dress accentuating her graceful figure. She had a presence that was impossible to ignore, a magnetism that drew me in like a moth to a flame. I stood up to greet her as she approached our designated meeting spot, and our eyes locked in recognition. "Hi, I'm Emily," she said with a warm, inviting smile. "I'm Michael," I replied, my heart fluttering with excitement. We settled into a cozy corner of the restaurant, and the conversation flowed effortlessly. We talked about our lives, our interests, and our dreams. Time seemed to stand still as we laughed and shared stories, our connection growing stronger with each passing moment. The evening was a whirlwind of smiles, laughter, and shared appetizers. We discovered shared interests, and it felt like we were two puzzle pieces, finally finding our place in the world. But as the night deepened, something shifted. Emily's demeanor transformed from bubbly and engaging to eerie and unsettling. It began with subtle glances and whispers to herself, as if she were having a conversation with an invisible companion. At first, I attributed it to first date jitters, but as the evening wore on, her behavior grew increasingly erratic. "You know, Michael," she said suddenly, her voice dropping to a hushed tone, "I have a secret to share with you." I leaned in, curious and slightly concerned. "What is it?" She fixed her gaze on me, her eyes wide with intensity. "I'm not who you think I am." My heart quickened, my mind racing to comprehend her words. What did she mean? Had she lied about her identity? The unease in the pit of my stomach intensified. "Excuse me?" I stammered, a sense of dread creeping over me. Her voice trembled as she continued. "I'm not Emily. I escaped from a psychiatric ward a few months ago and they're looking for me." My blood ran cold as I listened to her words. It felt like the ground beneath me had crumbled away, leaving me in a state of shock. It couldn't be true. It just couldn't. "Wait," I managed to utter. "You're telling me you escaped from a psychiatric ward?" She nodded, her eyes pleading for understanding. "Yes, Michael. I need your help. They can't find me." Panic surged through me, my mind a whirlwind of confusion and fear. I had walked into a date that had taken a nightmarish turn, and I didn't know how to react. I don't know what to do," I stammered, struggling to comprehend the situation. She reached across the table, gripping my hand with a desperation that sent shivers down my spine. "Michael, please, I need your help. Can you hide me? Can you protect me?" I was torn, trapped between empathy and self-preservation. The thought of harboring a fugitive was terrifying, but the fear in Emily's eyes was undeniable. "Okay," I finally conceded, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'll help you, but you have to tell me everything." Over the course of the next hour, Emily shared her harrowing story. She had been committed to the psychiatric ward after a severe mental breakdown, but she believed that the treatment there was making her condition worse. She had planned her escape for months, watching for the right opportunity to slip away undetected. As she spoke, I couldn't help but feel a mixture of sympathy and dread. I had no way of knowing if her story was true, but there was an intensity in her eyes that was hard to ignore. It was as if her very life depended on my belief in her. We left the restaurant separately to avoid drawing attention. Emily assured me that she had been careful to cover her tracks, but she needed a place to stay. I offered to let her stay at my apartment temporarily while we figured out our next steps. The cab ride to my apartment was fraught with tension, our minds a whirlwind of fear and uncertainty. I couldn't help but wonder if I was making a terrible mistake, inviting a stranger with a potentially dangerous past into my life. Once we arrived at my apartment, I showed Emily to the guest room, promising her that she would be safe here. She thanked me profusely and assured me that she would stay out of sight while we devised a plan. Over the next few days, I helped Emily lay low. We changed her appearance, cutting and dyeing her hair and lending her some of my clothes. We barely communicated, always on edge, as if someone was always watching. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was living in a thriller movie, with each passing moment fraught with tension and uncertainty. Emily's story became even more convoluted as she shared more details about her escape and the people she believed were after her. It was a web of paranoia and fear, and I didn't know how much of it to believe. As the days turned into weeks, our relationship grew more complex. We cooked meals together, watched movies, and shared moments of laughter. But the specter of Emily's past hung over us like a dark cloud, a constant reminder that we were living on borrowed time. One night, as I lay in bed, a strange sensation washed over me. I felt as though I were being watched, as though someone were observing me from the shadows. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding, and scanned the room. It was empty, and there was no sign of anyone else in the apartment. I dismissed the feeling as paranoia and tried to go back to sleep, but the unease lingered. Just as I was about to close my eyes, I heard a soft rustling sound coming from the hallway. My heart raced as I climbed out of bed and cautiously made my way toward the door. As I peered into the dimly lit hallway, I froze in terror. There, standing at the end of the hallway, was Emily. Her eyes were fixed on me, her gaze unwavering. She was just a silhouette in the darkness, but I could feel the intensity of her stare. "What are you doing here?" I hissed, my voice trembling. She didn't respond, her gaze unblinking. It was as if she were in a trance, her eyes locked on mine with an eerie intensity. "Emily, this isn't funny," I said, my fear escalating. Still, she remained silent, her presence a haunting presence in the darkened hallway. With a surge of adrenaline, I lunged forward and flicked on the hallway light, but Emily was gone. There was no trace of her, as if she had vanished into thin air. I searched the apartment, my heart pounding in my chest, but there was no sign of her. It was as though she had never been there. I couldn't sleep for the rest of the night, my mind racing with fear and confusion. Had I imagined the entire thing? Or had Emily been in my apartment watching me sleep? The next morning, I confronted Emily about the incident, my voice filled with anger and fear. She denied any knowledge of what had happened, insisting that she had stayed in her room all night. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. It was as though I had stepped into a real-life horror movie, and I was the unwitting victim. As the days passed, the feeling of being watched continued to haunt me. I would wake up in the middle of the night, convinced that I had heard footsteps in the hallway or whispers in the darkness. But each time I searched the apartment, there was no sign of Emily. I began to doubt my own sanity, wondering if the stress and fear of our situation had taken a toll on my mind. I couldn't escape the feeling that I was losing control of my own life. One night, as I lay in bed, paralyzed by fear, I heard a soft, melodic humming coming from the hallway. It was a haunting tune, one that sent shivers down my spine. I summoned every ounce of courage and crept out of bed, my heart pounding in my chest. As I approached the hallway, the humming grew louder and I could see a faint, ethereal glow emanating from the living room. With trembling hands, I pushed open the door to the living room and froze in terror. There, standing in the middle of the room, was Emily. But it wasn't the Emily I had met on Tinder. Her eyes were vacant, and her face bore a twisted, malevolent grin. She was bathed in an eerie, ghostly light, casting long, ominous shadows across the room. "Emily, what are you doing?" I whispered, my voice trembling. She continued to hum the haunting tune, her gaze fixed on me with an unsettling intensity. It was as though she were in a trance, a puppet being controlled by an unseen force. "Emily, snap out of it," I shouted, my fear giving way to anger. But she didn't respond. Instead, she took a step toward me, her grin widening. It was a grin that sent a chill down my spine, a grin that belonged to a nightmare. I backed away, my mind racing for a way out of this nightmarish scenario. I needed to escape, to get away from whatever had taken hold of Emily. Just as I was about to turn and run, Emily lunged at me with a speed and ferocity that defied belief. She was on me in an instant, her hands closing around my throat with a vice-like grip. Just as I was about to turn and run, Emily lunged at me with a speed and ferocity that defied belief. She was on me in an instant, her hands closing around my throat with a vice-like grip. I struggled to breathe, my vision growing dim as I gasped for air. Emily's eyes bore into mine with a madness that was impossible to comprehend, a madness that threatened to consume me. But just as I was on the brink of losing consciousness, Emily's grip loosened, and she stumbled backward, collapsing to the floor in a heap. I gasped for air, my heart pounding in my chest, as I watched her convulse and writhe on the floor. It was as though she were possessed by some malevolent force, a force that had taken control of her and was now releasing its grip. I scrambled to my feet and backed away, my mind reeling with fear and confusion. I didn't know what had just happened, but I knew that I needed to get out of the apartment before it was too late. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, my voice shaking as I described the terrifying encounter. The operator assured me that help was on the way, but I knew that I couldn't wait for the authorities to arrive. I fled the apartment, my heart pounding in my chest, and didn't stop running until I was several blocks away. I didn't know what had happened to Emily, but I knew that I couldn't go back. The police arrived at my apartment shortly thereafter, and I watched from a safe distance as they entered the building. I didn't know what they would find, but I prayed that Emily was no longer a threat. Hours turned into days, and I waited anxiously for news of Emily's fate. It was a terrifying ordeal, one that left me scarred and shaken to my core. Finally, I received a call from the police. They had found Emily in my apartment, unconscious and unresponsive. She had been taken to a psychiatric facility, where she would receive the help and care she so desperately needed. The authorities assured me that I was safe, and that Emily posed no further threat. But the scars of that night would never fully heal. A reminder of the Tinder date from hell that had taken me to the brink of terror and back. As I moved forward with my life, I couldn't help but wonder what had driven Emily to such a terrifying state. Had she been a victim of her own mind, a prisoner of her own demons? It was a question that would haunt me for the rest of my days, a question with no easy answers. The world of online dating is filled with the promise of new connections and the potential for love. But it is also a world fraught with danger, a world where the line between reality and nightmare can blur in an instant. And as I closed the chapter on the Tinder date from hell, I couldn't help but wonder what other horrors lurked in the shadows, waiting to be uncovered by those who dared to swipe right. It was a typical Friday evening in our quiet suburban neighborhood. The sun had set, and the streetlights flickered to life, casting a warm glow on the tree-lined streets. My best friend Sarah and I had been planning this sleepover for weeks, eagerly awaiting the night when my parents would finally go out on a date and leave us alone in the house. As the day turned into night, my parents, Mike and Linda, prepared to leave. They had been married for over 20 years and rarely had the opportunity to have a night to themselves. I watched as they exchanged glances, sharing a moment of anticipation before their big night out. "Girls," my mom said, smoothing down her dress, "we'll be back by midnight. Don't stay up too late, and remember, no wild parties." My dad chuckled, giving me a wink. "Yeah, we trust you, Katie. Just don't burn the house down." I rolled my eyes, but I couldn't help but smile. I was 16, responsible, and my parents knew it. Sarah and I had everything planned out. We had snacks, a stack of movies, and a giant pillow fort set up in the living room. It was going to be an epic night. With hugs and reminders to be careful, my parents finally left and Sarah and I were alone. The excitement was palpable as we settled into our makeshift fort, surrounded by blankets and pillows. We began with a cheesy rom-com, laughing and sharing stories of high school drama. As the night wore on, we decided to switch to a classic horror movie, hoping it would give us an adrenaline rush. The darkness outside the windows added to the eerie atmosphere, and the wind rustled the trees, casting strange shadows on the walls. I couldn't help but feel a shiver of unease, but I brushed it off as simple paranoia. Around 10:30 p.m., we heard a sudden noise outside. It was a faint scraping sound, like someone trying to open a window. Sarah and I exchanged nervous glances, the horror movie forgotten. "Did you hear that?" I whispered. Sarah nodded, her eyes wide with fear. We carefully peered out of the living room window, hoping to catch a glimpse of what was causing the noise. The backyard was shrouded in darkness, and our hearts raced as we strained to see anything unusual. Just as we were about to conclude that it was probably a raccoon or a stray cat, we heard a distinct creaking sound from the direction of the front door. Panic surged through us as we realized that someone was trying to break in. "Call 911, Sarah whispered urgently, her voice trembling. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, my heart pounding in my chest. As I explained the situation to the dispatcher, Sarah and I retreated deeper into the fort, our hearts pounding in our chests. We whispered to each other, trying to stay calm and hidden. The dispatcher assured us that help was on the way, but with each passing second, our fear intensified. Who were these intruders, and what did they want? We huddled together, listening to the intruders' fumbling attempts to enter our home. It was clear they were not professionals, but that didn't make them any less dangerous. We could hear their muffled voices, and the sound of them forcing their way through the front door made my blood run cold. Suddenly, The living room lights flickered and we were plunged into darkness. The intruders must have cut the power. Panic swelled within us, and we clung to each other, praying for help to arrive soon. Minutes felt like hours as we waited in the darkness, listening to the intruders rummaging through the house. It was a helpless feeling, knowing that we were so close to danger, yet unable to do anything about it. Finally, the distant wail of sirens pierced the night, signaling the arrival of the police. Relief washed over us as we heard the intruders panic and scramble to escape. We could hear them crashing into furniture, cursing and yelling in frustration. The sound of police officers shouting orders and the clatter of handcuffs being fastened soon followed. It was over, and the threat was neutralized. Sarah and I cautiously emerged from our hiding place to find the living room in disarray. But thankfully, we were unharmed. The police explained that they had caught 2 men in their early 20s attempting to break into our house. They were armed with crowbars and had criminal records. The officers assured youth that they would be taken into custody and face charges for the attempted break-in. My parents arrived home shortly after the police had secured the scene, their expressions filled with worry and relief. They hugged us tightly, thankful that we were safe. The rest of the night was a blur of statements, police reports, and comforting words from my parents. Sarah and I were grateful for the swift response of the authorities, but the adrenaline rush had left us drained and shaken. In the aftermath of the incident, my parents installed a security system, and our once tranquil neighborhood became more vigilant. We learned that safety could never be taken for granted, even in the most peaceful of places. As the years passed, Sarah and I continued to share that unforgettable night as a testament to our friendship and resilience. We grew older and wiser, realizing that our bond had deepened through the shared experience of facing danger together. While our sleepover had gone horribly wrong, it had also revealed the strength of our friendship and the support of our community. We would forever be grateful for the police officers who had arrived just in the nick of time, and for the unwavering love and protection of our parents. In the end, our sleepover had turned into a night of terror, but it had also become a defining moment in our lives, one that we would carry with us as a reminder of our resilience and the importance of being prepared for the unexpected. It was a warm and muggy summer evening in Camden, New Jersey, 20 years ago. I was 8 years old and my best friend Jake was 9. We lived on the same block and had been inseparable since kindergarten. We spent countless hours playing video games, riding our bikes, and dreaming about the adventures that awaited us. One Friday night, our parents decided to treat themselves to a rare date night, leaving my mom in charge of the sleepover. My mom, who we lovingly referred to as Mrs. Anderson, was known for her warm, welcoming smile and her ability to make the best chocolate chip cookies in the neighborhood. We couldn't have been happier about the sleepover, and we had big plans for the night: video games, popcorn, and an epic pillow fort. As the sun dipped below the horizon and the streetlights flickered on, my mom set up a fortress of blankets and pillows in the living room. It was a masterpiece, with secret compartments for our snacks and a command center for our video games. With wide grins, we settled in for a night of endless fun. The evening started off like any other sleepover. We gorged on pizza, laughed at silly jokes, and played video games until our thumbs ached. My mom, always the doting host, had even agreed to let us stay up an extra hour past our bedtime. It was shaping up to be the perfect night. Around 10:30 p.m., we decided to take a break from our gaming marathon and indulge in a late-night snack. My mom had just finished baking a fresh batch of chocolate chip cookies, and their warm, gooey scent filled the air. As we enjoyed our cookies and milk, the conversation turned to ghost stories, a staple of any sleepover. "Have you guys heard about the old haunted house down the street?" Jake asked with a mischievous grin. My eyes widened with interest. "No way! Tell us more." Jake leaned in closer, his voice low and dramatic. "Legend has it that a long time ago a family lived there, but they disappeared one by one, and no one ever saw them again. Some say their ghosts still haunt the place." My mom chuckled from the kitchen. "Oh, come on, Jake, you're scaring them." But Jake wasn't done. And you know what's even scarier? They say that on nights like this, when the moon is full, the ghosts come out to find new playmates, kids like us. We exchanged nervous glances, our imaginations running wild. My mom had always said that ghost stories were just that, stories. But in that dark, cozy living room, the tale took on a life of its own. As the clock ticked closer to midnight, my mom finally decided it was time for bed. We brushed our teeth and changed into our pajamas, but the ghost story still lingered in our minds. What if there was some truth to it? What if ghosts really did exist? I climbed into my sleeping bag, which was tucked inside the epic pillow fort, with Jake right next to me. My mom kissed us goodnight, dimmed the lights, and retreated to her own bedroom down the hall. We were left alone, in the quiet stillness of the night. Just as we were beginning to drift off to sleep, we heard a faint noise coming from downstairs. At first, it sounded like the creaking of old floorboards, but then it grew louder and more distinct. Jake and I exchanged wide-eyed glances, our hearts pounding in our chests. "What was that?" I whispered. Jake shook his head, his voice barely a whisper. "I don't know, but it's coming from downstairs." We listened intently, and our fear intensified as we heard what sounded like muffled voices and hushed footsteps. Someone was in our house, and it wasn't my mom. Panic seized us, but we knew we had to be quiet. We grabbed our flashlights and clung to each other, our minds racing. Who could it be? What did they want? Downstairs, we heard the intruders moving closer, their voices growing louder and more urgent. We couldn't make out what they were saying, but it was clear they were searching for something, or someone. Tears welled up in my eyes as I thought of my mom, asleep down the hall, unaware of the danger lurking just beneath her. I whispered to Jake, "We have to do something." He nodded, his face determined. "Let's sneak out of here and find my dad. He lives just 2 houses down and he'll know what to do." Carefully, we crawled out of our sleeping bags and tiptoed toward the bedroom door. With trembling hands, I turned the knob as slowly as I could to avoid making any noise. As we crept down the hallway, the voices downstairs grew louder, and the urgency in their tone sent shivers down our spines. We made it to the front door, and just as we were about to open it and make a run for it, we heard footsteps approaching the bottom of the stairs. Panic surged through us, and we darted into the nearest closet, closing the door behind us. We held our breath, our hearts pounding so loudly we were sure they could be heard. The closet was cramped and filled with coats and old shoes. We huddled together in the darkness, our flashlights turned off, praying that the intruders wouldn't find us. Through the slats of the closet door, we could see a faint glow as they ascended the stairs. My mind raced with fear and confusion. Who were these people, and why had they broken into our house in the middle of the night? We were just kids, innocent and defenseless. As the intruders moved through the hallway, their voices became clearer. We could hear the man's deep voice and the woman's hushed whispers. They were searching for something, and it didn't take long for us to realize that they were looking for us. "Where are those brats?" the man growled. "I don't know, but we need to find them," the woman replied. We clung to each other, tears streaming down our faces as we realized the gravity of the situation. These people weren't here to steal our belongings. They were here to kidnap us. The intruders continued their search, checking each room one by one. The tension in the closet was unbearable as we listened to their footsteps drawing closer. We knew that our hiding place wouldn't remain a secret for long. Just as we were on the brink of despair, we heard the sound of sirens approaching our house. The wailing police car was like a beacon of hope in the night, and the intruders seemed to panic. They muttered curses and hurriedly retreated, their footsteps growing fainter. We waited in the closet, our hearts still pounding, until we were certain that they were gone. The police arrived shortly after, led by my mom, who had been awakened by the commotion. They searched the house, but the intruders had managed to escape without being caught. My mom hugged us tightly, her face pale with fear and relief. The police assured us that they would do everything in their power to find the intruders and bring them to justice. In the days that followed, our quiet neighborhood was abuzz with fear and concern. The story of our near kidnapping spread like wildfire, and parents became even more vigilant about their children's safety. The ghost story had become a chilling reality, and we realized that danger could lurk where we least expected it. As the years passed, Jake and I remained close friends, forever bound by the traumatic experience we had endured together. We grew up in a neighborhood that had been forever changed by that fateful night, and we learned the importance of looking out for one another and trusting our instincts. Looking back on that night, I can't help but be grateful for the bravery and quick thinking that Jake and I displayed as young children. It was a night of terror and danger, but it was also a night that forged an unbreakable bond between us. We may have been just kids, but we were survivors, and we carried that strength with us as we faced the challenges of growing up. And as for our quiet Camden neighborhood, it may have lost some of its innocence that night, but it gained a newfound sense of vigilance and unity. We learned that even in the darkest of moments, there is always hope, and there are always people willing to stand up and protect one another. I was just a curious teenager when I first heard about the dark web, a hidden corner of the internet shrouded in mystery and infamy. The allure of this hidden realm was undeniable, like a forbidden fruit tempting me with its secrecy and intrigue. Little did I know that my curiosity would lead me down a path of terror and dread that would haunt me for years to come. It all began one fateful evening when I stumbled upon a YouTube video about the dark web. The video claimed to offer a glimpse into this enigmatic underworld, a place where anonymity reigned supreme, and anything could be bought or sold, no matter how illicit or illegal. Intrigued, I followed the video's instructions on how to access the dark web, downloading a Tor browser, and taking the first tentative steps into this digital abyss. I had no intention of engaging in any criminal activity. I was merely a curious teenager looking to satisfy my curiosity. As I delved deeper into the dark web, I was bombarded with a disturbing array of content: illegal drug markets, hackers for hire, and sites dedicated to the most grotesque forms of pornography. It was a chilling descent into the digital underworld, a place where the boundaries of morality had all but disappeared. One evening, while exploring the dark web, I came across a site that sent shivers down my spine: the Silk Road. It was infamous for being a marketplace for illegal drugs, weapons, and other contraband. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the screen as I browsed the listings, unable to comprehend the audacity of those who operated in the shadows. As I perused the Silk Road, a sense of unease settled in my gut. I knew that I was treading on dangerous ground, that this was a world I had no business being a part of. But I couldn't resist the morbid fascination that drew me further into its depths. Days turned into weeks as I continued to explore the dark web, each click taking me deeper into a digital labyrinth of danger and depravity. I was careful to maintain my anonymity, using fake usernames and taking precautions to protect my identity. I convinced myself that I was safe, that the digital barrier between me and the criminal underworld was impenetrable. But then, the unthinkable happened. One evening, as I logged into a dark web forum to lurk and observe, I received a private message. It was from an anonymous user with the username Silk Road King, and the message simply read, "I know who you are." My heart pounded in my chest as a wave of dread washed over me. How could this person possibly know who I was? I had taken every precaution to protect my identity, or so I thought. I hesitated for a moment, my mind racing with fear and uncertainty. But curiosity got the better of me, and I responded to the message, demanding to know what this person meant. The response was chilling. "I know your real name, your address, everything. You can't hide from me," the anonymous user wrote. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead as I read those words. It was impossible, inconceivable that someone on the dark web could have discovered my true identity. Panic set in as I realized the gravity of the situation. I immediately disconnected from the dark web and shut down my computer, my hands shaking with fear. I knew that I needed to tell someone, but I was too terrified to approach my parents. I had ventured into this world of darkness on my own, and I felt a crushing weight of guilt for my actions. Days turned into weeks and I lived in constant fear, convinced that the shadowy figure known as Silk Road King was watching my every move. I couldn't sleep, couldn't concentrate on anything else but the looming threat that hung over me. Finally, unable to bear the fear any longer, I mustered the courage to confide in my parents. Their reaction was a mixture of anger, concern, and disappointment. They immediately contacted the local authorities, who began an investigation into the threat against me. The police took my case seriously, but tracking down an anonymous user on the dark web proved to be an arduous task. The investigation led to dead ends and false leads, and the months passed with no progress. Despite the lack of progress in the case, the threats from Silk Road King continued. I received anonymous emails filled with chilling messages, each one a reminder that I was being watched. The stalkers seemed to revel in my fear, taunting me with their knowledge of my life. My parents and I were living in a constant state of dread, never knowing when or how the stalker would strike next. We installed security cameras around our home, changed our locks, and took every precaution to protect our family. One night, as I sat alone in my room, the email notification on my computer pinged. I opened the message and my blood ran cold. It contained a series of images, pictures of my house, my family, and even me, all taken from a distance. The message that accompanied the images was chilling. "I'm closer than you think," it read. Terror gripped me as I realized that the stalker had somehow managed to physically locate me. I immediately called the police, who arrived at our home with a sense of urgency. The investigation intensified, with law enforcement agencies from multiple jurisdictions working together to track down Silk Road King. The stalker's emails and messages were traced back to various locations around the world, leading to dead end after dead end. As the authorities closed in on the stalker's digital trail, the emails abruptly stopped. It was as if Silk Road King had vanished into thin air, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions and unsolved mysteries. Months turned into years, and my family and I lived in a state of constant vigilance, always wondering if the stalker would resurface. We never received closure, never learned the identity of the person who had terrorized our lives. But then one day, as I checked my email, I saw a message from an unknown sender. It was a single sentence, one that sent chills down my spine. "I'm still here." The message was brief, but it was enough to reignite the fear and uncertainty that had haunted us for so long. The stalker had returned, and there was no telling what they might do next. As I write this, I still live in fear, knowing that Silk Road King continues to watch, continues to taunt me from the shadows. I can't escape the terror that has become a permanent part of my life, a constant reminder that the darkness of the internet can reach out and touch even the most unsuspecting of souls. The dark web had lured me in with its promises of anonymity and intrigue, but it had also revealed the darkest aspects of human nature, the capacity for cruelty and the relentless pursuit of power. It had shown me that danger could lurk in the most unexpected of places, and that the digital world was a realm where anonymity could be both a shield and a weapon. My hope is that by sharing my story, others will heed the warning of the dangers that exist in the dark corners of the internet. The digital abyss may be alluring, but it is also a place where nightmares can come to life, where shadows can reach out and haunt you long after you've logged off. First sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the quiet suburban neighborhood where I spent my childhood. It was the kind of evening that begged for outdoor play, and so, as the golden light began to wane, a group of neighborhood kids gathered for a game of hide-and-seek. I was only 10 years old at the time, full of youthful enthusiasm and boundless energy. Hide-and-seek was our favorite game, and on that fateful evening, it would become a chilling memory that would haunt my nightmares for years to come. Our neighborhood was a close-knit community, and we knew each other well. The rules of the game were simple. One person would be it and count to 100, while the others scattered to find the perfect hiding spots. I volunteered to be it first, closing my eyes and counting aloud as the others dashed off to conceal themselves. As I counted, my anticipation grew, knowing that I would soon have the thrill of seeking out my friends in their chosen hiding spots. I reached the count of 100, shouted, "Ready or not, here I come," and began my quest to find them. I combed the neighborhood, searching high and low, checking behind trees, under porches, and in every conceivable hiding place. The game was exhilarating, the adrenaline pumping through my veins as I got closer to finding each of my friends. It was during my search that I stumbled upon a house at the end of our block, a house that had always seemed a little out of place in our otherwise idyllic neighborhood. The windows were perpetually covered with heavy curtains, and the overgrown bushes in the front yard hid the house from view. As I approached the house, I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. It was as if an invisible barrier of dread surrounded it, warning me to stay away. But the excitement of the game urged me forward, and I pushed through the overgrown bushes to search the area. My heart raced as I approached the back of the house. The windows were dark, and the silence was deafening. I knew that my friends couldn't be far, and so I decided to check the basement, thinking it would be the perfect hiding spot. I cautiously opened the basement door, its hinges creaking softly in the stillness. The dim light of the setting sun barely penetrated the darkness below. I called out to my friends, expecting to hear gigglies or whispers in response, but there was only silence. I descended the creaking stairs, my heart pounding in my chest. The basement was filled with an eerie stillness, broken only by the distant chirping of crickets outside. I could barely make out the shapes of boxes and furniture, shrouded in shadow. As I moved further into the basement, I heard a faint noise, a soft shuffling sound coming from the far corner of the room. My curiosity turned to apprehension as I approached the source of the noise. And then, in the dim light, I saw him, a man huddled in the corner, his eyes wide with fear. He was disheveled, with wild hair and tattered clothes. I could barely make out his face, but the look of desperation in his eyes sent a chill down my spine. I was paralyzed with fear, unsure of what to do. It was clear that this man was not one of my friends, that he did not belong in the basement of this house. As I took a step back, he began to mutter incoherently, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and confusion. I knew that I had to get out of there, to find help and bring someone back to deal with the situation. But as I turned to leave, the man's demeanor changed. He lunged at me, his eyes filled with a manic intensity. I screamed in terror, stumbling backward and crashing into a stack of boxes. The man pursued me, his grip tightening around my wrist as he tried to pull me toward him. I fought with all my strength, kicking and flailing in a desperate bid for freedom. By some stroke of luck, I managed to break free from his grasp and scrambled to my feet. I sprinted up the stairs, bursting out of the basement and into the fading daylight. My breath came in ragged gasps as I ran toward the safety of my friends. I found them huddled together, their faces pale with worry as they realized what had just transpired. I recounted the terrifying encounter in the basement, my voice trembling with fear. Together, we raced to the nearest neighbor's house and called the police. They arrived swiftly, their sirens piercing the quiet evening. I guided them back to the house at the end of the block, my heart pounding as I feared the man might still be lurking in the shadows. The police conducted a thorough search of the house and its surroundings, but the man was nowhere to be found. It was as if he had vanished into thin air, leaving behind only the lingering fear that hung in the air. As the days turned into weeks, the police launched an investigation into the mysterious man who had tried to keep me locked in his basement. They combed through missing persons reports, hoping to identify the individual and uncover the truth about his presence in that house. But the mystery remained unsolved. The man's true identity remained a puzzle, and the motive behind his actions remained a haunting enigma. In the aftermath of the incident, my parents and the parents of my friends held a meeting with the neighborhood watch, emphasizing the importance of vigilance and safety. We were cautioned to always be aware of our surroundings and to report any suspicious activity immediately. Years passed, and the memory of that terrifying encounter gradually faded into the recesses of my mind. I grew into adulthood, leaving behind the innocence of childhood and the horrors of that day. But then, one evening, as I was checking my email, I received a message from an unknown sender. The subject line sent a shiver down my spine, and my heart raced as I opened the email. "I'm still here," it read. The message contained a single image, an old, weathered photograph of the house at the end of our block, with the words "Never Forget" scrawled in jagged handwriting. The fear and dread that had haunted me for years came rushing back as I realized that the man from that fateful day had never truly disappeared. He still lurked in the shadows, a menacing presence that refused to be forgotten. I immediately contacted the authorities, sharing the email and the chilling message it contained. They reopened the investigation, determined to finally uncover the truth about the man who had tried to keep me locked in his basement all those years ago. As I write this, I can't help but wonder about the man's true identity and his motive. What drove him to pursue a terrified child that day? And why had he resurfaced, sending me that haunting email? The answers may remain forever out of reach, lost in the shadows of that traumatic childhood experience. But one thing is certain, I will never forget the fear, the terror, and the courage it took to escape from the clutches of a stranger in the basement of a seemingly ordinary house in our quiet suburban neighborhood. Missouri stretched out before me, an endless expanse of rolling hills and dense forests, a picturesque canvas of nature's beauty. I had decided to take a road trip through the heartland, a solo adventure that would take me far from the hustle and bustle of city life. Little did I know that this journey would lead me to a place of terror and survival. I had been driving for hours, the winding roads of Missouri leading me deeper into the heart of the state. The scenery was breathtaking, with towering trees and winding rivers that seemed to stretch on forever. It was a serene and peaceful landscape, the kind of place where you could forget about the worries of the world. As I continued on my journey, I couldn't help but feel a sense of isolation. The road had become increasingly remote, with few signs of civilization along the way. My phone's GPS had lost signal, and I relied on a paper map to guide me through the labyrinth of country roads. The day had been uneventful, with nothing but the open road and the soothing sounds of nature. But as the sun began to dip below the horizon, a feeling of unease settled in my chest. I had been driving through dense forest for miles, and there was no sign of a town or gas station in sight. My car had been running on fumes for what felt like an eternity, and I knew I needed to find fuel soon. I had no choice but to keep driving, hoping that I would stumble upon a gas station before my car sputtered to a stop. Just as my anxiety reached its peak, I saw a small sign by the side of the road. It read, "Gas, 10 miles ahead." Relief washed over me, and I pressed on, my eyes fixed on the road ahead. 10 miles felt like an eternity, but eventually I saw the flickering lights of a gas station in the distance. I pulled into the gravel lot, my car's engine sighing in relief as I parked by the lone fuel pump. The gas station was like something out of a horror movie, a dilapidated, run-down building with a flickering neon sign that read, "Open." There were no other cars in sight, and the silence was deafening. I approached the pump cautiously, my footsteps echoing in the empty night. As I began to fill my tank, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. It was a subtle, nagging sensation that sent shivers down my spine. I glanced around, scanning the darkness for any signs of movement. The gas station was surrounded by dense forest, the trees casting eerie shadows in the dim light. There was nothing to see, but the feeling of uneasy persisted. I hurried to finish filling my tank, my heart pounding in my chest. Just as I replaced the gas nozzle, I heard a soft rustling sound coming from the woods. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The rustling grew louder, more pronounced, and I could hear the distinct sound of footsteps approaching. Someone or something was coming out of the woods and heading toward the gas station. Panic surged through me as I fumbled for my car keys, my hands trembling with fear. I knew I needed to get out of there to escape whatever danger lurked in the darkness. Just as I was about to jump into my car and drive away, a figure emerged from the woods. It was a man, tall and imposing, with a dark hood pulled low over his face. He moved with purpose, his gaze fixed on me. I didn't wait to see what he wanted. I slammed the car door shut and peeled out of the gas station, my heart racing as I left the stranger behind in the darkness. I didn't know where I was going, but I couldn't stay at that gas station. I drove deeper into the forest, my headlights cutting through the night as I navigated the winding roads. Fear gnawed at me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being pursued. As I continued to drive, I realized that I had no cell phone signal, no way to call for help. I was on my own in the middle of nowhere, with no idea who the mysterious man was or what he wanted from me. I decided to find a place to hide, to wait until morning when I could hopefully find my way to safety. I turned off the main road and onto a narrow dirt path that led deeper into the forest. It was a risky move, but I had no other choice. The path grew narrower and more treacherous, with dense trees closing in around me. I drove for what felt like hours, my anxiety building with each passing minute. I had no idea where I was, and the sense of isolation was overwhelming. Just as I was beginning to lose hope, I saw a faint glimmer of light through the trees. It was a cabin, nestled deep in the forest, its windows aglow with warm, inviting light. It was the first sign of civilization I had seen in hours, and I felt a surge of relief. I pulled up to the cabin and knocked on the door, hoping to find help, or at least some answers. The door creaked open slowly, revealing a middle-aged man with a grizzled beard and tired eyes. "Please, you have to help me," I pleaded, explaining the terrifying events that had brought me to his doorstep. The man's expression darkened as he listened to my story. He told me that I was not the first person to seek refuge at his cabin, that others had come before me with similar tales of being pursued through the woods by a mysterious figure. He explained that the man I had encountered was no ordinary stranger. He was a serial killer who had been terrorizing the area for years. He would lure unsuspecting travelers to remote locations where they would disappear without a trace. The man offered me shelter for the night, and we barricaded ourselves inside the cabin, armed with whatever makeshift weapons we could find. The hours passed in tense silence, every creak of the cabin's wooden walls sending shivers down my spine. As morning broke, we decided it was safe to venture out and find help. The man led me back to the main road, where we flagged down a passing car and explained the situation to the driver. The driver called the police, and within hours, a search party was dispatched to the area. The search for the serial killer spanned several days, with law enforcement combing through the dense forest and surrounding areas. Finally, they apprehended the man, whose real name was revealed to be Samuel Turner. He was a cold and calculated predator, responsible for the disappearances of numerous travelers over the years. My ordeal had come to an end, but the memory of those terrifying hours in the Missouri wilderness would haunt me forever. I had been hunted, pursued through the woods by a serial killer who had chosen me as his prey. As I returned to my normal life, I couldn't help but wonder what might have happened if I hadn't found refuge in that remote cabin. I knew that I had been fortunate to escape with my life, but there were others who had not been so lucky. The experience had left me with a deep sense of vulnerability, a realization that danger could strike when least expected. I had survived the nightmarish encounter in the heartland, but I would carry the scars and the memories with me for the rest of my days. As for Samuel Turner, he was brought to justice, tried for his heinous crimes, and sentenced to life in prison. The heartland of Missouri was no longer haunted by his malevolent presence, but the shadows of that fateful night would never truly fade away. It all began with a subtle sense of unease, a feeling that something was amiss in my own home. Little did I know that this vague discomfort would unravel into a chilling revelation that would haunt my nights and turn my life into a relentless nightmare. I lived alone in a quaint, two-story house nestled in a quiet suburban neighborhood. It was a cozy abode, with a neatly landscaped front yard and a spacious backyard where I would spend my evenings sipping tea and reading. Life had its usual routines, work, hobbies, and the mundane rhythm of daily living. One evening, as I settled into my favorite armchair with a book in hand, I heard an inexplicable rustling sound from above. My initial instinct was to attribute it to the typical creaks and groans of an aging house. Still, something about it seemed off, out of place. I set my book aside and listened carefully, my senses on high alert. There it was again, a faint, shuffling noise like footsteps but softer. I couldn't deny it any longer. It was coming from the ceiling, specifically from the crawl space above me. The crawl space wasn't something I paid much attention to. It was a small, dusty attic, accessible through a narrow opening in the ceiling of my bedroom closet. It had always been a place for storing old furniture and boxes filled with forgotten memories, a space that remained untouched for as long as I could remember. As I continued to listen, I heard the sound of something being moved, a muffled scrape against the floor above. Dread settled in my chest as I realized that someone or something was up there, moving around in the crawl space. Fear coursed through me and my mind raced to make sense of the situation. I lived alone, and there was no reason for anyone to be in my house uninvited. Had an intruder somehow gained access to my attic? The idea was unsettling, but I had to investigate. With cautious steps, I made my way upstairs to my bedroom. I opened the closet door and peered up at the small hatch that led to the crawl space. It was closed, just as it always had been. I reached up and pushed it open, revealing the dark, narrow passageway beyond. Using a flashlight, I climbed into the attic and shone the beam of light around the space. It was exactly as I remembered it, filled with dusty furniture and old cardboard boxes. Nothing seemed out of place, and there was no sign of an intruder. I hesitated for a moment, convinced that my imagination had played tricks on me. Perhaps it had been a rat or some other small creature making the noise. I made my way back downstairs, determined to put the incident behind me. But as the days passed, the strange occurrences continued. Objects in my house seemed to move on their own, subtle changes that I couldn't quite explain. Food disappeared from my pantry, and the sense of unease that had first settled in my home began to intensify. Each night, as I lay in bed, I could hear the soft sounds of someone moving about in the house. The footsteps were light, almost ghostly, but they were unmistakable. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone in my own home. My fear grew with each passing day, and I found myself becoming increasingly paranoid. I questioned my own sanity, wondering if I was imagining the entire thing. But the evidence was there. Food missing, objects moved, and the ever-present sense of being watched. I decided to take action. I installed security cameras throughout my house, hoping to capture evidence of the intruder who had invaded my life. The cameras covered every room, every corner, and even the crawl space itself. For a while, it seemed as though the presence had vanished. The house was silent, and the nights passed without incident. I began to believe that I had driven myself to madness with my irrational fears. But one night, as I reviewed the footage from the security cameras, my heart skipped a beat. There on the screen I saw a figure, a shadowy, indistinct shape moving through my living room. I watched in horror as the figure moved from room to room, its movements eerie and unnatural. It seemed to glide effortlessly through the house, pausing occasionally to examine objects and surfaces. It was as though it had taken possession of my home. My mind raced, and I couldn't deny the truth any longer. There was someone living in my crawl space, someone who had been watching me, moving things around and even eating my food. The footage was undeniable proof of the presence that had haunted me. With trembling hands, I called the police, explaining the situation and showing them the security camera footage. They arrived at my house with a sense of urgency, ready to confront the intruder who had invaded my life. As they entered the house and made their way to the crawl space, I felt a sense of dread settle in my chest. I knew that the truth would be revealed, but I couldn't have prepared myself for what they would find. Four police climbed into the attic, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. I watched from below, my heart pounding in my chest, as they moved cautiously through the crawl space. Minutes passed, and then they emerged, their faces pale with shock. They had found evidence of someone living in the crawl space, a makeshift bed, food wrappers, and personal belongings scattered around. But there was one detail that sent shivers down my spine. Written on the wall of the crawlspace in what appeared to be charcoal were the words, "I've been watching you." The police assured me that they would investigate further, determined to apprehend the person who had been living in my crawlspace. They took the evidence with them, leaving me to grapple with the horrifying reality of the situation. That night, I couldn't sleep. The thought of someone living in my home, watching my every move, filled me with a sense of violation and dread. I questioned how long this had been going on, how many nights I had spent unaware of the intruder in my midst. As days turned into weeks, the police conducted a thorough investigation. They discovered that the intruder had been entering and exiting the crawl space through a hidden access point in the basement, one that I had never noticed. The authorities scoured the neighborhood, searching for any leads or witnesses who might have seen the intruder, but there was no trace of the person who had invaded my life, and no one seemed to have any information about them. The weeks turned into months, and despite their best efforts, the police were unable to locate the intruder. It was as though they had disappeared into thin air, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions and lingering fear. I couldn't shake the sense of unease that had settled over my life. I moved out of the house, unable to bear the thought of living in a place that had been violated in such a disturbing manner. The intruder had left behind a legacy of fear and paranoia that would haunt me for years to come. To this day, I don't know who was living in my crawl space, watching my every move. I don't know why they chose me or what their intentions were. The mystery remains unsolved, a chilling reminder of the darkness that can lurk in the most unexpected places. As I settled into a new home, I couldn't help but wonder if the intruder had moved on to another unsuspecting victim, or if they were still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike again. The fear of the unknown lingers, a constant reminder that sometimes the most terrifying threats are the ones we can't see coming.